Trigger warning. This podcast episode features discussions of toxic workplaces, as well as emotional and narcissistic abuse. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Sarene Leeds. I'm a professional writer and storyteller, and I'm so glad you're here. The podcast's Toxic Workplace series continues today with my guest, Vanessa Walilko. Vanessa is an artist, a PR professional, and a survivor of emotional abuse in both her family and the workplace. These experiences have provided her with a grounded perspective, as well as an indispensable wisdom when it comes to creating a healthy work environment. I am certain her insights will be helpful to anyone who is listening. But as always, before we get into the episode, I have a few quick announcements. Please make sure you're following me on Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes. That's SareneLeedsWrites. And that you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, don't forget to support Emotional Abuse is Real by leaving a 5-star rating and writing a review over on Apple Podcasts. Another way to connect with me and this podcast is through my email list, which you can subscribe to by downloading my free resource, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. This download is a collection of some of my best writing tips and tricks, all of which I learned from covering television. Finally, if you're interested in being a guest on Emotional Abuse is Real, you can always either DM me on Instagram, email me at hello@SareneLeedsWrites.com, or you can fill out my quick and simple application form. I've left links to my Instagram, email, the show's application form, and my free download in the show notes. Although I'll be covering toxic workplaces for the next couple of months, this podcast, at its core, will always be a safe space to discuss any form of emotional abuse. Even though this podcast covers heavy subject matter, I genuinely enjoyed my discussion with Vanessa Walilko in today's episode because we were able to bond over so many shared experiences. Our chat is yet another reminder of why I love doing this podcast. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Vanessa Walilko.
My name is Vanessa Walilko. I currently work in PR. I'm also an artist. I make chainmail jewelry and costuming. I used to study domestic violence in college. I actually did my senior thesis on the relationship between domestic violence and childhood abuse. And I am a lifelong survivor of emotional abuse.
Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. So in our initial exchanges, and as you just said, you are an ideal guest for this podcast because unfortunately you have experienced emotional abuse both in childhood and in toxic workplace settings. So I'd like to give you the floor to first talk about your childhood, and then we'll move on to your experiences in toxic workplaces. So you said in your initial message that you had several people in your family with untreated personality disorders, and as a result, you had to do a lot of parenting when you were a child.
Yes. So, because I know in the podcast in previous episodes, you've talked about narcissistic abuse. And,
yes, indeed. Yeah.
So narcissistic abuse, I'm pretty sure a couple of my relatives who have now passed had borderline personality disorder as well. Again, I don't know how much you know about those cluster B personality disorders. There's so much overlap. The distinction is really just for insurance purposes, but so many of the behaviors are the same. So aside from dealing with narcissistic abuse and abuse from borderline, I was also a parentified child. So my grandparents grew up in Poland during World War II. They are, again, the only reason they went to labor camps as opposed to death camps is because they were ethnically Polish as opposed to, Catholic as opposed to Jewish Poles.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I appreciate your clarifying that. And I'm so sorry that happened to them because I am Polish Jewish. So yeah.
So
yeah.
You want
I do. Of course I do. And I was very, very, very privileged. All four of my great grandparents came to the U.S. by 1920.
Oh, thank God.
I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you for clarifying. And I'm so sorry that happened to them.
Oh, of course. And thank you. And of course. And I always bring that up because there was this article that I read in college that I actually started reading and couldn't pick up until about 20 years later, because it was talking about the parentifying of children who were raised by Holocaust survivors. And I feel like World War II had such a huge effect on how I was raised because my grandparents helped raise me growing up. So they had all this trauma that they never resolved, and then raised my mom and my aunt, who they were terrible to, and who also had trauma that wasn't resolved. And then I came along and I was this golden child, and I was privileged in a lot of ways and I was spoiled in a lot of ways, but also this emotional burden was put on me very early of being a caretaker for adults. And that can feel so destabilizing because adults are supposed to create boundaries for you and to make you feel safe. And when the opposite is true, it's not a surprise I started having panic attacks when I was 5. And
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Yes. But it all kind of ties together, right? It's not, this stuff doesn't come from nowhere. It's trauma, it's unresolved. And then unfortunately kids get the brunt of it because we've still decided as a society that kids are the one kind of justified target of abuse, right? Like they're the one group that everybody can still discriminate against. And it's just, that's just being a kid or just raising children.
No. And I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I mean, I do know that the older generations didn't know how to get themselves help or wouldn't even think to do so. It doesn't excuse what happened. But unfortunately, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, which is how it falls to us, the younger generations now, because we're so much more aware about the need of that therapy and that healing.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. Because growing up, I remember, because again, nobody hit me growing up, and even in many cases, I wasn't yelled at, but there was so much chaos and yelling around me. And again, I was in this kind of peculiar situation because on the one hand, I'm dealing with narcissistic abuse, I'm dealing with borderline abuse, but on the other hand, I'm parentified. So I'm being dismissed, but also people are turning to me for their emotional needs and getting their needs met. So it created this kind of bizarre position where I could yell at my family for yelling all the time or for being irrational, and I wouldn't get in trouble for it. They probably knew that they were doing something wrong. And it took a kid saying like, hey, stop yelling.
Right.
But then of course the gaslighting where my grandmother would say like, you think this is yelling? You don't know yelling. And I'm like, all right, Babchi, okay. As she's yelling. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. So that, again, that was my background. And again, emotional abuse is one of those things that people really don't think is real. And you don't really know it's real because it's this invisible thing that happens. Yeah. No scars, no bruises. And so much of it gets dismissed. I think especially if people haven't dealt with narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse, or are in denial about their experience. Yeah. So they're way more likely to minimize what you're going through, to act like it isn't real, because then they would have to face, oh, wait, was I emotionally abused as a child as well? Chances are probably yes, because it's so prevalent.
So prevalent.
And
oh my God, so prevalent.
Yeah. So I had no idea. I wasn't thinking in those terms when I was younger.
Yeah.
But I also don't think it's a surprise looking back now that I ended up connecting with a professor at DePaul University who was doing an assessment of the Cook County domestic violence program. Mm-hmm. And so I got very steeped in domestic violence for the last 2 years of undergrad and was reading about like this book Donald Dutton wrote. Of course, I'm going to forget the title, but he was trying to make the argument that all domestically violent men had borderline personality disorder. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. He was trying to argue that we don't need feminism as an analysis for domestic violence. Like, okay, but who are the targets and why is it socially acceptable?
You can't completely dismiss it. Oh my.
Again, men will write entire books rather than go to therapy, but it's okay.
Of course they will. Of course they will.
It's okay. So I got steeped in that research, and of course I'm like looking at my shelf now because I started reading Alice Miller when I was in high school, and that idea of narcissistic abuse and what that does when your parents are narcissists, when they're not attending to your needs, when they make everything about them.
Yeah.
And again, how damaging that is, how much anxiety that creates, and these behaviors that you end up developing in reaction to an abusive situation, which help you survive abuse. But as soon as you leave, it's going to be toxic to any other relationships because it's a trauma response. And again, it keeps you alive in a traumatic situation, but it can damage relationships or damage yourself outside of that.
Yeah.
So I did my senior thesis on that and looking at domestic violence, and then, decided to do art for a really long time.
Did it help?
Did it help? Yeah,
good.
It did. Okay. And running my own business was also really good because I like doing my own thing, and I essentially forced myself to develop self-confidence, because I know that's something a recurring theme in your podcast.
Oh yes,
emotional abuse is so damaging to the psyche, to your confidence. And what you have to do in order to make yourself a whole person after all of that. It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
It really is. That's why I can't work for a company anymore. I have to work for myself.
If I didn't like my boss, I wouldn't be able to work for anybody anymore.
I get it. I'm so... I know we're going to get into all that, but I'm so happy that you have a great boss.
Same. Yeah. Because the job before that, I did not have a great boss. She was terrible.
We're going to get into that. Yeah.
We are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, you've experienced this too. You have these people who, again, there are so many narcissists who may have like a superficial charm, but fundamentally they hate themselves and they feel like failures. And so they make that everybody else's problem. It's like, I get it. We all have things in life that we didn't achieve or wanted to materialize that didn't happen. It's not anyone else's fault. Certainly not the fault of people who are subordinate to you. So don't take it out on them.
Oh, totally. And, I didn't really understand the whole concept of a narcissist until I was in therapy while I was still at Rolling Stone. And my therapist had to teach me that my boss was a narcissist.
Right. Again, it's so funny because, again, I grew up with this, so I can spot them from a mile away.
Right. And I had to start learning about them as an adult because I had it with my boss and unfortunately in my husband's family. Yeah. Some of them are gone now, but it's very hard.
It's incredibly hard because again, it's something that you never get over when you have a parent who is narcissistic, when you have family members who, again, everything is about them. They constantly redirect them. They conflate their discomfort with the actual harm that they have caused another person. And if you bring up that harm, I'm currently not necessarily but very minimal contact with my mother. It's like you bring it up and they treat you like you're a monster because you have just declared your needs and your boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. Because she's passed on, I will say it. My mother-in-law was one of those people, and I knew about her trauma. Yeah, but because she never got the help that she needed, a lot of damage.
Yes,
my husband, his family members, even to an extent with me, and so and for me, it's been like a crash course. So I look to you because I know you've been living with it since you were a child. I was very fortunate to not have that in my childhood, but then it just came it just smacked me in the face when I became an adult between my boss and the members of my husband's family.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's got to be so jarring too, because again, even for me growing up with it and identifying it and knowing it, when somebody does that kind of narcissistic heel turn, when they've done the whole charming thing and you don't see it, and then suddenly it comes out of left field, it's so disorienting. So I can only imagine, not growing up with it, what it must be like when suddenly you are consumed and you realize, oh, I'm trapped. My boss is a narcissist. My mother-in-law is a narcissist. I have to learn how to navigate this.
And I had no idea what to do. And my family members had never seen it before because they couldn't help me. Like an example I love to give is when we were getting married, like whether it was my wedding shower or other things, like my mother-in-law just still wanted everything to be about her. And we were like, what? And it was because I'm sure of her own trauma and hurt that, she didn't know how to address.
Oh, yeah, of course. And again, kind of fundamentally, when you're dealing with someone with a narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, it's from an unstable sense of self, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Borderline people need somebody else to kind of soothe them and localize them. And narcissists need validation from external people because they fundamentally have no sense of self-esteem that derives from their own, like, I'm just a human and I deserve love and warmth and kindness. No, I achieve these things and I get praise for these things. Yeah. It's all these external things. And those you can have the rug pulled out from you at any moment. So it's so precarious. So it needs constant validation, but it's just so draining for the people.
Oh God, yeah.
Around.
Oh God, yeah. And especially for someone like me who actually had gone through a lot of her life not getting her feelings validated. Not because my parents were narcissists. Absolutely not. It just wasn't part of their upbringing.
Yes.
I'm also, I've said this on the podcast because we've had these conversations a lot. Like, we do not blame our parents because even though I personally, or rather I do not blame my parents. And I personally am trying to take what I have learned to make myself a better parent for my daughter.
Yes.
I don't always succeed.
But you're trying.
But I'm trying.
It's so funny because I do blame my parents.
Okay. Totally. Yeah. And that's a completely, yours is completely different situation.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and again, it's, and I really try very hard to destigmatize, because I think a lot of people, like I still have anger towards them, my entire family, but it doesn't, it doesn't affect my daily life. I just know it's there. And I know it's something I will carry because there are certain wounds that you just learn to carry. And I've had to come to terms with a lot of those. Some things you can fix, some things can be healed, some things can be softened, some things can't. You just learn to carry them. Yeah. And that's okay too. So I always, I joke, I go, I have a lot of hate in my heart, but that doesn't make me a bad person.
No, it doesn't. And we've had guests on this podcast that have said, like, it's okay if you're in the darkness. Like, you can, the only way you can heal is if you do focus on that negative. Like, I was raised, don't focus on the negative. And I don't do that anymore because you have to, because it's the only way you can heal. What I wanted to say, the difference between like me and my parents is like and I call this a generational thing. Mm-hmm. Like, they cannot criticize their own parents. Like, they could never say that they did something that was wrong. That's what I always say. Yeah. I can say that my parents did something wrong. I can admit that I did something wrong as a parent. Yes. But there are some things that my grandparents absolutely did that were flat out wrong. Yes. Flat out wrong.
Yes.
I can say it. My parents can't say that. So that's what when I talk about, trying to improve, learn, build from my experiences. That's what I try to do.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And it's one of those things when you realize, again, my mother is very much the same way. My grandparents, again, there were some good things that they did. There were a lot of terrible things that they did. And my mom is just constantly like, oh, but you should love your grandparents and don't criticize them. Like, why?
Right.
If they did terrible
Right.
things, it doesn't diminish my feelings for them.
Yeah.
But I have to hold them both, because if I don't, again, people who are unwilling to face real trauma, real darkness, you're just it's gonna chase you until you face it. So face it early, because it farther down the road, it's harder to look at and really analyze. Yeah.
So what is your relationship with your family members now?
I mean, a lot of them have passed. I grew up in a very small Polish family.
Okay.
And yeah, my grandparents have passed. My aunt passed. And I'm mostly no contact with my mother because she refuses all help. So
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you have to do what's best for you. That's what I always say.
Also that. And no one cuts off contact from their family on a whim.
Oh God. Oh God. Yeah.
People very similar to emotional abuse, where people act like it's not real and it doesn't have like serious consequences. Similarly, not all people, but some people treat people who have gone no contact with their parents as entitled or as selfish or whatever. And again, from a genetic perspective, from a social perspective, to choose to cut off contact is made with so much concern and so much consideration, and it takes so much to get to the point where you're going to sever your relationship with your own parents.
Of course.
Which I'm mostly just saying for the audience, because you understand, and I
understand. No, but you have to say it for the audience, because it's an individual choice.
Yeah.
And like you said, you don't do it on a whim.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you can't.
You can't. No, it's one of the most serious decisions you can make. And you shouldn't feel guilt about it, because you were pushed to that point. No one's ever like, nah, I'm just done. It's like what it took for me to finally cut her out compared to other people and other narcissists or other people's abuse, which is just like, oh no, out, I'm done. As soon as I identify it, I'm like, oh, you're gone, bye. For your own mother, again, the gravity of it is.
Of course. How long has it been since you went no contact?
I really just less than a year. And we had to like briefly talk, because unfortunately we own my condo together. So we had to talk about paying the taxes. But other than that, and she, she's like, I forgave you for not talking to me for all those months. And I was like, I don't need your forgiveness. I don't care. You could be mad at me forever.
She made it about herself.
Because she can't not. Exactly.
I know.
Exactly.
I know. Yeah. I know. Oh man. Well, how do you feel?
Oh, about being no contact?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Good.
The weight that's off me, because I don't have to caretake somebody. I don't have to caretake my own mother.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, all right. So now I want to hear about your toxic workplace experience. Hey, listen, I'm in the midst of just recording everything right now, but like when I do my intros, one of the reasons why I'm doing this series is because I was in my own toxic workplace, and also because I stumbled upon the toxic workplace TikTok rabbit hole.
That is so much fun.
So, oh my God, I was like, I found my people. So I was like, I can't believe that this podcast has been around for a year and I haven't really delved into that yet. So here we are.
and it's another one of those things where, again, we've just, so many of us have just been socialized to take it, this assumption.
Yeah. Yes, well, I certainly was.
Of course. Of course your boss is going to be demanding or irrational in some way, or overbearing. There's just this weird expectation.
Yeah.
It's abusive. It is.
And then I also call it a generational thing. I'm a baby Gen Xer. I'm a Zennial. And so I think we were all conditioned to just take it. And it's really refreshing to see the younger generations saying no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's so funny, again, to some people, some older folks, because I'm also that like elder millennial, zennial. My favorite is the Oregon Trail generation, which I I love.
Definitely. I played so much Oregon Trail. I died of dysentery many, many times.
So many times. Those axles are always breaking.
Yes.
And this idea of like entitlement, and in so many of these cases, it's people who don't want to face the fact that they haven't demanded more for themselves or expected more for themselves. And so they're angry at people who can advocate for themselves, who can stand up and say, "Oh, this is an abusive environment. Nobody should have to deal with this. No. Nobody should be talked to this way."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, but so what happened to you?
Oh boy. So I worked at a toy store. I used to like the company a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I started working there, and it was just a part-time thing. This is a whole other thing, but like I had lost, again, when my grandmother passed, my aunt passed, I was dating somebody, he had also passed. My life kind of fell apart. I walked away from everything, dark night of the soul for several years, then started working again. And first just started out part-time at this job. The pop-up store turned into an actual solid retail location, so I continued on. And my boss from the start, like so many terrible managers, just dismissive and rude and undercutting, and nothing was ever right. Nothing was ever... And the astonishing thing, again, somebody who was constantly criticizing us for not putting things away right, not doing things right. First of all, she hoarded garbage in the back room, in the storeroom.
Okay.
We took photos. I'm skipping ahead. I'm skipping ahead. But my team and I ended up taking photos of absolutely everything before cleaning it out, because she ended up getting transferred to a different department. And so I ended up managing the store. And I was like, all right, guess what? It's our store now. Whatever you want to do. And again, kind of a difference in management, because I knew all them because they had been my coworkers. So I trusted all them, and they would come to me. I just remember my one coworker, she's like, "Vanessa, can we please clean the back room? Can we throw all this stuff out?" I was like, document it first.
Yeah. Good.
For management.
It's good for you for doing that. Yeah.
Again, as much issue as I have with my mother, one thing that she did teach me growing up was to always keep receipts, always keep documentation. So I always do now.
That's a great lesson. That regardless of your relationship, that's a great lesson.
It has served me well. I tell everybody else, like, keep screenshots, keep receipts, keep emails, keep everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, because she, like, again, my former manager, she never wanted anybody to take initiative. She would criticize when people would do their own thing. So again, when I finally took over, and like I said, my coworker, "Can we please clean out the back?" I was like, "You do whatever to the back is going to make your life easier. I don't care. Is all the stock easily accessible? Then let's trash all this. It's all trash." But yeah, so like I said, just unwilling to let anybody take any kind of initiative. Everything had to be her way, but that would change on a whim sometimes. So we would have displays of the stuffed animals. And at one point there were, she's like, I want these all filled out so there are 4 on each shelf. And then she got mad at us because there were only 3. And then the next week, well, I think 3 looks better. So,
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, coming from this fundamental, like I could see it came from fundamental insecurity. And she also knew that she wasn't qualified for the job because she was so good at managing people. She got the job because it was a pop-up, and the person who had left, who had been manager, like, just liked her better. And so that's why she got the job.
Yeah.
I found all this out from one of my coworkers later. because I am the person, and I won't say this woman's name, but I am the person who I'm like, "So what do you think about former manager's
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
And then we'll say like, I didn't like when she did that, and then the flood, the torrent of all these other horrible things that she had done to other people. But again, being dismissive, being rude, and also like going on like hour-long lunch breaks and not clocking out, and going
So
shopping
obnoxious.
once for an hour and a half and not clocking out. And she would do that so that she would let us have leeway so that we could take lunch breaks without clocking out, so she could be more egregious once she was out of the store for an hour and a half.
Okay.
I know.
I mean, this just goes back to how, like, I find that so many managers, not all, like, how do they get these jobs? Because, like you said, they're completely incompetent. And it's so true about how, in so many cases, people put personality over skill set. And, like, because I certainly saw that at Rolling Stone. My boss, he wanted people that were going to stroke his ego, who were going to like be his pal, but he made a fundamental mistake when he hired me. He hired someone who was really good at her job, because I was starting to notice that a lot of the other people in our department, not all of them, but there were a lot of other people in the department who he would hire, and I'd be like, wait a minute, they're not even good copy editors. How is this happening?
Yes.
Yeah, it's because they want the ego stroking.
Exactly that. Yes, they want somebody who is going to fawn over them, so
fawning.
they can feel great.
Yes.
And so people who have that skill can skate by on that skill and not do a good job, because the narcissist is getting what they need for their ego.
Exactly. And that's when I was the one who kept getting into trouble, even though I was the best copy editor in the department, because he's like, why don't you treat me better? Oh, you're so selective in how friendly you are with certain people. And I was like, it's called boundaries. You creep me out and I don't want to be around you.
Yes.
Oh yeah. That's what he would do. Yeah.
Oh my God. Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
I just, again, they're all the same. This is the astonishing thing. They're all the same. Once you can identify, oh, this person is a narcissist, the behavior is the same across the board. It's that same, like, again, that need that for validation, that inability to handle healthy boundary setting. Because that's another thing, growing up with people with these untreated personality disorders, there's this expectation of enmeshment. So who I am is nothing. It's all who the narcissist is and what they need me to be or what they think I am. So it's all this object relationship stuff. And when you, like you did, you show your personhood, the narcissist doesn't know how to handle it.
Exactly what happened. Yeah. And like we were talking about before we started recording, what really hurt almost more so was the bystander effect, the people who did fawn, and also the people who didn't support me when it was beyond obvious that I was being mistreated. And I mean, did you have that experience at all in your own toxic workplace?
Well, she was mistreating all of us, and we were all complaining to each other. And so it was funny because we ended up becoming a very tight-knit unit, and I'm still friends with and still talk to a lot of these people.
That's great.
It was incredible because she was awful, but everybody who worked there was lovely. Yeah. Two of my closest friends came out of that job. And it was so it was one of those things where nobody was really fighting back until I hit a point where we were swamped all day. I was training a new person, and for the holidays, we were swamped. And it would be this kind of thing where groups and groups of people would come in, they would swarm, and then they'd leave, and then we'd have to reset all the merchandise because everybody was just picking things up and throwing them down, didn't care.
Yeah.
So it had been like that for hours, right? And again, my manager had been at the other store, the other location, and she breezes in a couple hours later than she said she would. Yeah. And so I'm standing behind the counter with the new hire because we've been swamped all day. And I'm just checking in with her. Nobody's in the store. Nobody's in the mall. We're fine, right? I'm checking in with her. We've been, again, cleaning up merchandise all day. We can take a 5-minute breather and talk and just check in.
Yeah.
And so she comes in and she it walks into the back, and then the new hire went to the bathroom. And so I'm setting things up, and she says, I can't believe you let this place just be such a mess. And again, because she'd been late and because she had no idea, switch flip, I snapped. And again, I'm tall and I'm intense when I get pushed.
Yeah.
And I just looked at her. I go, you have no idea what we've been dealing with today. I go, you breeze in here late and you're making snide comments about what's going on in the store. And she got so scared.
Love it.
Yes.
I love it. I love it.
Because
good for you.
Thank you. And as you know, at their root, narcissists are cowards.
Yes, they are.
If you stand up, when you were talking about how your boss didn't even show up on your last day, I was like, of course.
Yeah. I was actually relieved because I knew no matter what, it was going to be really awkward. Mm-hmm. I mean, it still put off his cowardice, but you know why? Because in the past, whenever anyone else had left, he would give a speech making it all about himself, and he would always start crying.
As a very sensitive person, it drives me wild when people manipulate with their emotions like that. Uh-huh. Like, I cry at the drop of a hat, but I usually keep it on lock because, again, I'm a sensitive baby, but you have these people who are only emotional when it's to try to get sympathy or try to get look at me, I'm such a compassionate, good boss, and I care so much about this person leaving. It's like, no, you don't.
I will never, I don't think I've talked about this particular instance before. There was someone in our department who left after a year, and he's, giving his little speech, and he's like, and I'm just going to miss her beautiful spirit. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Seriously.
What's the matter with you? And I was looking at the girl who was leaving, and I was like, oh my God, you poor thing. I am so sorry. So in a weird way, I'm extremely grateful that he didn't show up, but the fact that he called out sick just spoke volumes, because this was a guy, because this was pre-COVID, he would always come to work sick because he always felt that the office would fall apart if he wasn't there.
You mentioned that. Yeah, I know. And again, like I said, my former manager, she had that sense about the store too. And it's like, we thrived once she left. We thrived. We thrived.
I'm sure.
And it was completely different leadership because, again, I'm people oriented. Because if you're a manager, what matters more is that your team feels safe and supported. Yeah. So they all did. And so we did great, even when there were inventory shortages at the beginning of the pandemic, and we had to make do with nothing, sometimes next to nothing. Our store got top first for all the stores in the country 3 weeks in a row. And we did not have shipments because we just made it work, whatever we had. But I would bring in pizza and I would bring in donuts, and I would let them all know, I thank you so much for this. They knew that I thought they were valuable. It's just a different way of doing things.
Absolutely. What would you say is a sign of a good, healthy work environment? Because I know that you're in one now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having somebody, first of all, again, my current boss is constantly telling me that the work that I'm doing is good, that she values me as a person, that she values the work that I do, that she can see even when we have problem clients. And some of them, they get on my last nerve. Oh yeah. She's constantly telling me, I want you to know that I know it's not you, it's them. I see that. And she also finally has seen, because of all the shit I've dealt with, I can just tolerate more than most people can. Yeah. And that is not a badge of honor thing, by the way. That is a trauma thing that I'm still working through.
Of course.
Yeah. But it's this idea that so she finally, it became clear that one of our clients was just a problem.
Yeah.
And so now she's just constantly telling me like, okay, I know, I get it. You know, I had done some paperwork for them and I was really excited because I got it done and it came back with like several notes with very obvious things that I'd missed. And she's like, I don't want you to feel bad about these notes. I know it's because you're stressed out. I was like,
Oh,
thank you.
oh my God. Listeners, take note. This is the sign of a great manager. This is what we need more of.
That
Yeah.
again, if you're going to manage people, if
Yes.
you have to be oriented towards people. Like one of the things with that former company that made me so mad is that they instituted a progressive discipline policy.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, first of all, I'm fine with that if that also means that the abusive managers can leave. But if it's only to punish the people who are making $12 an hour selling toys to an ungrateful population,
Yeah.
nope. Like,
that's not going to work.
It's not going to work. And it's nonsense. And also, if you're having a problem with your employee, I'm sorry, I treat this a lot of times the way I treat like people with rowdy kids or people with bad dogs, where it's like, you did not train them right. You did not communicate with them right. Like if you have a problem employee who's late all the time, who is insubordinate, all of that, you are not a good manager. You have not established boundaries and authority in a way that, again, people understand, like, okay, this is the boss. It's not like iron fist kind of rule. It's just respect. Yeah. If there's no respect, if you are not respecting the people, your subordinates, how do you expect them to respect you? Like,
exactly.
No, they might abide your authority, but they certainly don't respect you or your authority.
Yeah. I had no respect for my boss because he was terrible at his job. He didn't understand boundaries. He also, like I think I mentioned about he didn't understand the concept of personal space. I was like, dude. And then when I would kind of like step back, he'd be like, I don't have cooties. I was like, I was like, dude.
I know. It's like I have
no self-awareness, none.
Well, and also it's like the lack of self-awareness and the lack of the lack of sense that people have different wants and needs than you do.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, okay, you might feel comfortable with your face this close to my boobs. I need several feet actually in between.
Exactly. And the reason why I wound up looking like the problem one is because since so many people in their own quest for survival, they took the fawning route. So that was what made, and so that's why when I talk about my coworkers and not having that support, that's what was so frustrating. Because while I understand from a logical point of view why they took that approach, it hurts so much more because everyone's going to make their own decision.
It's one of those things where, again, I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD. I also suspect I'm autistic. So I will push back. I'm usually the first person to push back, and then other people will follow. But if I see somebody is like, if there is an unjust situation and somebody is taking the fall, my first response is to back that person up.
I could have used you 10 years ago. And I just want to thank you for sharing about your diagnosis. I actually love talking about those topics as well. My daughter has ADHD, and we are about a month away from her own diagnostic evaluation regarding autism. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, of course. Well, and especially, again, this is something I could talk about for another hour. Like, being a gifted girl growing up. And right. And being like pushed in the way that I was. And now looking back and thinking like, oh my God, if I am autistic, which I'm pretty sure I am, that was the worst thing for my nervous system. Like nobody ever taught me to rest. It would just keep going, keep pushing, keep fighting.
Well, it may not be, I'll tell you from experience, teaching you how to rest may not, if you are on the spectrum, that may not make a difference because I can tell you right now, my husband and I are constantly telling our daughter to rest. It doesn't mean that it'll happen.
That's true.
So let me just put that out there as a caveat because, believe me, we try to get her to rest so much.
That's so good. Yes.
We're trying. Like I said, I don't always succeed with this. It's very hard. It's very hard. Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
now at 41, looking back and looking at my whole childhood and saying like, oh, wow, like the very obvious cues. But again, when I was growing up, right, this like elder millennial Oregon Trail generation, like boys were autistic and they looked a certain way and they behaved a certain way.
Yes.
And all the research I do now, because of course this is one of my special interests, it's like when you have complex PTSD, if you are a minority group, if you're a woman, if you're a combination of all those things, your autism experience is an expression is potentially going to look a lot different,
Yeah. Yeah. I had a thought, and of course now, this is a part that's going to be edited while I try to get back on where I want to be. But I am finding that so many people of your age, I'm about 5-6 years older than you. So, but so many people in like their early 40s are getting diagnosed now, and it's wonderful. I mean, but at the same time, so I look at that, and I'm also so grateful that we are getting my daughter the help that she needs now at the age of 7.
It's so, again, I wish I was ahead. I wish that it was part of the conversation and I could have had more support growing up.
Of course.
Just structurally. I mean, again, growing up with an immigrant family and a Polish family and the like, I'll just rub dirt in it, if you have an injury, like they probably would have done nothing for me. But
oh my goodness. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. Well, I have a feeling that we're probably going to be talking offline, like a lot more about
I would hope
a lot
so.
of different subjects. But just to wrap up, I just would love to hear any advice. This is what I ask all of my guests, as you probably have heard. If there's someone out there who's dealing with emotional abuse and or in a toxic workplace, what is one piece of advice you would give as a first step towards healing, extracting themselves from the situation?
So if you are in a toxic workplace, don't do what I did, which is just quit and walk out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I landed on my feet, but I don't encourage it. But really what you did, where you had a plan, you knew, and it, like, again, that fawning thing is so useful because narcissists don't look past it, right? So if you need to escape and want to escape and you can stomach fawning to get the heat off you, do that.
Yeah.
And just, these, and I think it also helps that I was raised by narcissists, so I can like code switch,
Yeah. I get it. I couldn't do it, but clearly a lot of people chose that route and that's what worked for them.
Again, ultimately it didn't pan out, but when my former manager had left, I was like, let's assemble all the evidence. So all my coworkers, because we'd all been complaining for so long and all the issues. And there were photos, there were screenshots, there were emails, and I'll just put them together. And of course I reported it to HR and nothing happened, which is part of why I ended up walking out. Cause I'm like, this company doesn't care.
Yeah. We all had to learn the hard way that HR is not in your corner, unfortunately.
Not ever.
Never.
Exactly. Never. But just develop a plan, get out. And I think even more, although even like fundamentally, because emotional abuse can really undercut who you are as a person. So whatever you can do, either spend time with people who are affirming to you, spend time developing a skill, whatever you can do to try to get some of that confidence back. Because when you mentioned being on antidepressants and all of that, because you can, and I've dealt with this myself where I like have all this anxiety or I'm starting to get like weird physical GI symptoms and I'm thinking, oh, what is going on? And most of the time it's stress. And and the stress of being in an environment like that can cause so much damage. So first figuring out a way to like get your confidence back. And maybe that is just walking out, but also if you could figure out an escape route, that's the best. That's the best. Because you leave a narcissist just like out on a limb dangling and you're like, bye. Have fun with that.
I mean, you heard what I said. When I presented my letter of resignation, he was surprised.
I know.
I was like, I did tell him, I was like, this should not be a surprise. This should not be a surprise. It's time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, and how can people connect with you?
Oh, sure. Probably the best way is through my jewelry website, which is Kali Butterfly. That's KALI butterfly.com.
Okay, wonderful. Vanessa, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you again.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Vanessa Walilko on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you would like to connect with Vanessa, I've left links to her website and Instagram in the show notes. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out via email at hello@sereneleadsrights.com, through Instagram at sereneleadsrights, or fill out my guest application form. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. Or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, START, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram and go grab my free download, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.